Well, good evening. Last week, we had the pleasure of introducing the book of Proverbs as we endeavor to get into this wisdom literature. And we spent the night just going over, getting familiar with what the Proverbs, what God is accomplishing through the Proverbs. And so we're going to jump into chapter 1 tonight. We welcome you. We welcome all those who are joining us by Facebook or YouTube, either now or in the future. And we pray that you will have a blessing from this material. And if you have any questions, please allow us to answer those questions. The Proverbs, Solomon wrote several books, right? He wrote Proverbs, and this was likely in the middle years of his life. He wrote Song of Solomon, which was likely written in the youth and the fire and fervor of his life. And he also wrote Ecclesiastes, which was probably in the later years and stages of his life. And so this book is going to have the flavor of instructing his son. Opens up in verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding. Now, when he says here, to know wisdom, this is something that can definitely, something that you can attain to. Knowledge and wisdom are attainable. You don't listen to people out in the world today, the highly educated, those that say that everything's relative, you can't know anything for sure. Solomon says here that you can know wisdom and instruction, and then he says to perceive. And that means to look upon. These things, this book would have been something that could be read. It could be looked upon. It could be perceived. It could be studied. Something that you can lay to heart. Something that you can mull over. Things that you can read and then chew on for the rest of the day. He says to perceive the words of understanding, and then to receive the instruction. Not only are you to perceive, but you are to receive that which you perceive. You are to receive the instruction of wisdom. If you are going to have a chance in this life, if you are going to develop yourself into being wise, if you are going to have a chance at life, being all that it can be, all that God intends for you to be, you're going to have to perceive the words and you're going to have to receive them. I think of James chapter 1, I believe it's about verse 21, where James writes, put away the foolishness, the overflow of wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls. Then he says, and be doers of the word. That's what Solomon's talking about here. Perceive it, read it, study it, then receive it, hide it in your heart, make it a part of who you are. Because when you do that, you won't be deceived. You perceive and receive and you won't be deceived. That's kind of like how that flows. But then he says in verse number 4, to give subtlety. That is prudence. Does anybody have a different translation? Prudence? Discretion, yes. So prudence is that careful judgment. It is that going about something in such a way as to not be in danger. Someone who has prudence about them. They are making decisions that are reasonable, and they are guided by reason and logic and that which is prudent. And it says to give prudence to the simple. And what this is the gullible, the naive, those whose heart is just wide open and their mind is wide open to just try and do anything under the sun, right? And that's very dangerous, especially for the young man who has that kind of outlook and philosophy on life. You know, flying by the seat of the pants, just whatever comes, get, neck deep in it. And that's not very smart. Solomon's not wanting his son to be this way. And to the young man, knowledge and discretion. Verse number 5, a wise man will hear and will increase in learning. And a man of understanding shall attain to wise counsels. Now here he says, you may grow up and be a wise man. And guess what you can still do? You can still learn. You can become more wise. And a wise man attains to wise counsel. A wise man doesn't think that he knows it all. He does not act like he is the end all to all knowledge, that he has everything figured out under the sun. Kings have counselors. Presidents have cabinets. We've got to have people that we trust and that we can bounce ideas and information and life experience off of. So he says that a wise man will continue to be wise when he reads these Proverbs, when he applies these things to his life, and he surrounds himself with other wise people. Verse number 6, to understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. This is saying that he needs to understand the meaning of these proverbs. You need to understand the significance of figurative language, and how we need that kind of understanding as New Testament Christians today, because the Bible is written in language, and language employs figures of speech and different things, and we've got to realize when different figures of speech and different grammatical tools are being emphasized and used within the text. You see, in Galatians chapter 4, verses 23 and 24, Paul starts talking about Hagar and Sarah and the sons, and how one represents this covenant and another one represents this covenant. And we need to understand what is being said. Peter, in 2 Peter chapter number 3, verses 15 through 17, talks about how Paul wrote, and some things were hard to be understood. We've got to take our time and sift through the text and come to a sound and logical conclusion about what is being stated. In verse number 7, going down through, we find the foundations of genuine knowledge. And verse number 7 has been called the motto of the Proverbs. It has been the entire theme of the book, if you will. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And within this verse, we see the contrast of two people. You have a person that is implied within this verse, that the foundation and the basis of his life, it begins with a reverential respect and awe for the authority of God. And then you've got the fool. The fool that does what? Despises wisdom and instruction. And we all know people that are like that, young men that grow up to not listen. They don't want to hear it. They've got to do their own way. They've got to find out. And God calls that person a fool. And at one time in my life, I was very foolish. And I did that very thing. And many of you may have too. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You cannot attain to any type of knowledge or wisdom separate and apart from the proper view of God. I've got to have God in His rightful place in my mind. or I will not have any knowledge at all. Nothing worthwhile. If you could recite the dictionary from memory, and you could sit down on a piece of paper and from your mind would flow the entire volumes, all the volumes of the Britannica, you would not be wise at all if you did not have a proper knowledge of God and a proper respect for God. The beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord. My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. And in this, the Bible is full of admonitions to children and parents and what the obligation for parents and children are. And children have an obligation to their parents, and parents, of course, have an obligation to their children. And we see that there's not an expiration date on this thing. There may be a change in the relationship, but there's still something that we owe each other. And he says to hear the instruction of thy father, and do not forsake the law of thy mother. You know, the Bible in Genesis, when we just covered it, I don't know if it was 2 years ago or what. It's been a while since we were in it. But in Genesis 46, Joseph is in Egypt. And his father, Israel, comes down to Egypt to buy. And Joseph falls on his father's neck and kisses him, weeps, shows that respect. In Genesis chapter 48 and verse 12, Israel comes up into his presence, and Joseph falls down on his face before his dad. Respect for him. Joseph was a grown man by now. Him and Jacob, his father Israel, had been separated for 22 years. And Joseph already had a family and kids of his own. But you know what he did? He respected and honored his father. And so should we. You know, we have in the Bible, in Exodus chapter 20, as Moses is recording the law in verse 12, there's the command given to the Israelites on children obeying their parents. Obeying their parents. That was something that was absolutely expected. And in Ephesians chapter 6, in the first 4 verses, Paul says this very thing: children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, that it may be well with you. That's the commandment that is with promise. He says, this is a command with promise, and if you obey it, things are going to be well with you. But there's also the responsibility of the parent. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. And so we owe each other respect and everything that God would want us to do. But that authority aspect of the parent and the child, it is so important. If your child does not respect you, who are they going to respect? They're not going to respect anybody. And they're not going to respect God either. Because it is in the home, within the parent and the child relationship, that children learn that type of respect for God. You remember in 1 John chapter 4, John, I think it's around verse 20, John says something to the effect of, he says that you should, how could you say that you love God whom you have not seen when you hate your brother that you have seen? you can't say that I love God. And the principle here with a parent and a child and God is true. How can you say that I respect I respect God, who you have not seen, but you don't respect your parents who you have seen? That's a very close idea. And our children have to be taught respect, and then once they know that, the instruction that our parents gives us will stick with us. In Proverbs 22:6, we all know that one. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, and that Hebrew word literally means bearded. When he is bearded, when he's an old man, he will not depart from it. Those seeds of training and faith and instruction planted in the child's heart and mind will eventually, there's always the exception to the rule, but the general principle is true, that those things will take root and develop. And now listen to the next verse. Verse 9, for they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head and chains about thy neck. And here we see these figures of speech. He says, that instruction, you hearing your father and you hearing your mother, and that word here, the idea is you adhere to those things. You practice those things. He says, they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head. It is the picture of a beautiful wreath being laid upon the head, and chains about thy neck. That is the idea of a necklace, beautiful necklaces, and what it pictures, it represents the beautiful character that is developed when a child respects the teaching and the training of his parents. You see, when they obey their godly parents, they are going to develop a beautiful godly character. And that's what he's saying. If you listen and you practice those good and right things, your life is going to be what God would have it to be. Your character is going to be what God would have it to be. And they may not appreciate you now for your standard, for your instruction and your discipline, but one day they'll get it. One day they'll understand. One day they may be trying to rear and train their own children, and you will have helped them be prepared for such an undertaking by the training and the standard and the expectations that you set for your children in your home. And then he goes into this next section is really good. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. And we get this picture of this young boy, and he is surrounded by his peers, and they're not good people. And they are literally tempting him and enticing him and asking him to get together with them so they can do sin. And he says, you know what? When that happens, don't consent. Don't do it. And you know the easiest way to accomplish that is to have your mind already made up. If this situation presents itself, I will not do that. If this situation, if I am tempted in this way, I know how I'm going to respond. And Solomon's wanting him to go ahead and make up his mind. What kind of person are you going to be? When you are approached by sinners that want you to be involved in their sinful action, you don't consent. You go the other way. And then he gives this illustration. If they say, come with us, let us wait for blood. Let us lurk privily for the innocent without cause. These are some nasty folks. These are some really bad people. Let us swallow them up alive as the grave, and whole as those that go down into the pit. Here's another tool. This is the pit here is a synonym for Sheol, for the Hadean realm. And he's saying, let's lurk privily and silently, and when some innocent person comes up, let's overwhelm them and do them dirty so fast and so hard that they are taken away just as fast, because when you die, guess where you show up in eternity immediately. The grave or Hadean realm will swallow you up in a minute, and that's what these nasty, evil sinners are trying to tell him. Let's lay in the wait. These innocent people come by, we'll hit them hard, and the grave will swallow them up before they know it, and what else is going to happen? He says, we shall find all precious substance. We will fill our houses with spoil. Cast in thy lot among us. Let us all have one purse. Oh, we're just going to really hit it big. And nobody's going to know, because we're going to dispose of this person. There's not any chance of us being harmed, because we're going to hit them so privately and so fast and so hard. They're not going to know what hit them. And so there's not going to be really any chance for us to be harmed. And we can just take the spoil and we can all enjoy it. There is no honor among thieves. You ever heard that? Solomon wants his son to be a little smarter than that. Because there is no honor among thieves. It's the wrong thing to do. And then in verse 15, he says this, my son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. We walk life's journey. Every day we make choices. And if I were a Calvinist, I would despise the Proverbs. Because it is purported and supposed that God has predetermined and selected every single action that will ever take place in this world with every single human being. So why waste your time, Solomon, trying to get your son to choose the right thing? Well, if he does the wrong thing, he's just doing that which God predestined him to do. It doesn't make any sense. I would despise this literature if I were a Calvinist. Go ahead.
I can think of quite a few times I've been with people as a kid, and they wanted to do something that I wasn't brought up to do, you know.
Right.
And luckily, I didn't get in trouble, and I didn't do it.
Yeah.
But it would have been easy to follow.
It is, and 9 times out of 10, what will happen is you get caught up in these things, and then those big bad guys, what do? They run, they tell on you, they do everything in the world to get out of trouble and pile everything up on you. Go ahead.
You know, we still run into the same problem they had back then. The love of money is the root of all evil.
That's right. And that does fit in perfectly there. All of these people, these type sinners, are looking for easy money. They're looking for an easy come up. They want something for nothing. And they are willing to take anything and everything, because what you've worked hard doesn't cost them a thing. What you have saved up doesn't cost them a thing. It's no skin off their back when they take from you, and you've got to pick up the pieces and figure out what you're going to do once they have wiped you clean. They don't care. All these guys all over the world, these guys in Africa and in the Middle East that spend their time and their life scamming people. They call the elderly and they trick them. They get them to download any desk on their computer, and they get them to, they make it look like they have deposited money in their bank account, and it's way too much, and they get that old person scared of that, and so they get them to send them $10,000, $20,000 so they can give what is what they deposited over in their account, and what they really showed them was fake. This happens all the time. And these guys in Qatar and all over the world that do this, they don't care that 85-year-old woman just sent them her life savings, everything that she has, and that she won't be able to afford her medicine next month. They don't care. It's no skin off their back. And it's evil. It's terrible. No honor among thieves. You don't want to associate with that kind, because you can't run with the dogs without getting fleas. You can't sleep with the goats without smelling like them. That's an old Leroy Brownlow saying, and I've heard it all my life. And it's true. We are affected by the people that we associate with and the things that we do with them. And the Bible over and over tells us not to associate with those people. You walk not in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. For their feet run to evil and make haste to shed blood. There is no limit some people will go to mess you over. And we live in a day and age where somebody will blow your head off for a $20 bill. We live in a day and age where there is no limit. I think it was about 2 years ago, it was down around where my wife's grandmother lives, down around the Rome, Armurgy area. Some guy in that general area killed his grandmother over $20 and put her body in a chest freezer. And they eventually found her. No limit to what people do. The love of money, the very root of all evil. People will kill their family. People will murder their friends. There is no limit to what people will do to get what they covet after. And so he says their feet run to evil. They make haste to shed blood. We all know Proverbs 6, 17, and 18. And what is the 7 things that are an abomination and God hates? Feet swift to running to mischief, hands that shed innocent blood. God despises that very thing. But the wicked, the evil, the sinners that want to promote harm on innocent people, it's nothing to them. He says here, surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. Birds will avoid that net. They're going to see that trap that's set before them, and they are going to get out of there. In vain the net is spread. Sin doesn't pay what it promises. Sin promises a whole lot of things. I mean, even in the Hebrew writing, in Hebrews 11, somewhere in between 25 and 30, we find this statement. The pleasures of sin for a season. Sin may be enjoyable for a time, but there's going to come a time where there is no more joy to be had in the process of sin. It does not pay what it promises you it will. It will not fulfill. All it will do is take and rob and take and destroy. And they lay wait for their own blood. Verse 18. They lurk privily for their own lives. So are the ways of every one that is greedy of gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof. We're talking about wicked people. People that will do anything to you to take what you have. And you reap what you sow. We find this in several different passages. If one of you would get Psalm chapter 7, verse 15 and 16. Psalm, the 7th chapter, verse 15 and 16.
He made a pit and dug it out, fallen into the ditch which he made. His trouble shall return into his own head, and his violent dealing shall come down on his own crown.
He set that net in vain, didn't he? He dug his own pit. He fell right down into it. You remember that little clip I showed you a while back with the guy that was going to rob that couple and he kept getting struck by lightning? That happened. He dug his own pit. We have an example of this very thing. I can't remember the fellow's name because it was a funny name, but in Esther chapter 7, this guy goes to the king, and he says, Haman has built a scaffold, something to hang on, the gallows, 50 cubits high. And the king said, and he's going to hang Mordecai on him. And the king said, no, you hang him on his own gallows. He set his net in vain. That's exactly what Solomon's talking about here. And it is true. It's a general truth. Sometimes people get away with horrible things. That's a fact. But I have faith and trust in God that one day, even if it's on the day of judgment and eternity, God will settle the score. And that's another reason why I can believe in this Bible. And that's another reason why the Christian system and a worldview of God, and what this book says, is superior to atheism. It's superior to evolution. Because if there is no God, there is no judgment and repayment for evil. And I can't stomach that. One day, God will settle the score. He says here in verse 20 through 23, he's talking about the personification of wisdom. And the Hebrew word for wisdom is in the feminine form. So he ascribes it with the feminine she. Wisdom crieth without. She uttereth her voice in the streets. She crieth in the chief place of concourse, in the openings of the gates in the city. She uttereth her words, saying, how long, ye simple ones, will you love simplicity? That word simple is also, it's folly. How long will you, full of folly, continue in your folly? How long will you, O folly, continue in your foolishness? He's already been talking about wise people and fools, right? That's what wisdom is getting at here. And the scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. The Bible, there's all kinds of different things and attributes that are attributed to a fool. You have the arrogant fool of Proverbs chapter 12 and verse number 15. God cannot stand someone puffed up and arrogant. He calls them a fool. You have the short-tempered fool of Proverbs 12 and 16. You've got the boastful man. God calls him a fool, Proverbs 14:3. You've got the fool that just wants to continue in his foolishness. His conscience is seared and he will not change his way. That is what the Bible calls a fool, Proverbs 14:9. The disobedient child, the disobedient person, Proverbs 15:5, is called a fool. The one who fosters strife, the troublemaker, Proverbs chapter 20 and verse number 3, is a fool. And those that are set in their foolishness, Proverbs 27 and verse 22. The Bible's got a lot to say about the fool. Proverbs, Psalm 14:1. The person that does not believe in God. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. A lot of different ways people can be foolish in this life. Go ahead.
And there's a lot of them too. A lot.
Yes. You know, we're instructed to seek and search after wisdom. And in a day and age in which we live, the day of information, We live in such an ignorant society. We live in a day and time where you have all kinds of knowledge, but nobody's concerned about wisdom. And there's the chief difference between them, right? We talked about that a little bit last week, how the knowledge and wisdom are not the same. You can know how some financial system works, and that's knowledge. But wisdom knows how to operate and run the budget. They're not the same. Wisdom knows how to balance the budget and operate within the means of the budget. Knowledge, you can know about the different systems, but wisdom knows how to operate within that system. So it is with life. He says right here, or she says, turn you at my reproof, verse 23. Behold, I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you. If you will just hearken to wisdom. She's crying aloud. She wants you to listen and to be able to develop yourself in wisdom. And if you'll do that, life is going to be better. Psalm chapter 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, or sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in that law doth he meditate both day and night. He will be like the tree that's planted by the rivers of water. Everything that he does will prosper. His leaf will not wither. But you know what? The ungodly, the foolish, they're not like that. The ungodly will not stand in judgment, or sinners in the congregation of the righteous, right? Because the Lord knows the way of the righteous. What happens to the ungodly? What happens to the fools? But the way of the ungodly shall perish. There's a way to do life and for it to be what God wants it to be. But if that is rebelled against, then we get what we have asked for, right? He says here, turn at my reproof. I will pour out my spirit unto you. I will make known my words unto you, because I have called and you refused. I have stretched out my hand and no man regarded. And a lot of people are like that today. A lot of people, you can lead them to water, but what can't you make them do? You can't make them drink. And you can tell them the truth, and they'll turn around and hate you for it. And we saw it in Paul's day, Galatians 4 and verse 16. Have I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? A lot of people will hate you for telling them the truth. A lot of people will not appreciate you being honest with them. And people are people, and they've always been this way. It said here, you have set at naught all my counsel, and you would none of my reproof. So I will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. And this is a scene where we see you get what's coming to you. You reap what you sow. God does not take pleasure in the calamity and the downfall of man. Ezekiel chapter 18 and verse 32, God has no pleasure when mankind falls. In Ezekiel chapter 33 and verse 11, he takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. God does, but how can you expect anything different than what your choices lead to? Our life is a composite picture of the choices that we make. And if we do not regard God, if we do not apply the wisdom that he has given to us, can we expect anything else? Wisdom sits back and laughs at you when you make stupid decisions that you've been warned against. You've heard the good thing, you've heard the good way, but you did not regard it. Well, don't expect any sympathy then when you do not the things that you know is good. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind. When distress and anguish cometh upon you, Then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but they shall not find me. Isn't that human nature? Isn't that what men do all the time? Even with God, have no time for Him. But then life blows up, and then it's all about God. Then I'm going to call on Him. We do a lot of dumb things, and then when calamity strikes, we want all the wisdom we can get. And wisdom says, you won't find me like that. You're going to have whatever you have gone after in this life, the fruit of what you sow to the wind, you reap the whirlwind. And when the whirlwind comes and your life is destroyed, too late to seek after wisdom then. You're not going to find it. It says, they will call upon me and I will not answer. They will seek me early, but they're not going to find me. For why? For that they hated knowledge. And here's this is a word that the Calvinists hate, and did not choose the fear of the Lord. The beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord. My attitude towards God is something that I choose. It's something that I make a choice of how I'm going to respond and act. And God calls man to that choice. In verse 30, they would none of my counsel. They despised all of my reproof. And that's what we see the result from their choice was their own doing. Therefore, verse 31, shall they eat of the fruit of their own way and be filled with their own devices. You make choices. I've heard it put like this. You make your bed, and then what do? You lie in it. We make a lot of silly decisions. We're going to have calamity to deal with. Take it from me, I know. This is true. This is right. We're going to have to eat the fruit of our own way, and I know it. Ultimately, because what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5:10, we stand before the judgment seat of God and receive the things which we do in our body, according to what we've done, whether it's good or bad. Revelation chapter 20, verses 12 through 15 that we quoted Sunday. When he said, I saw the small and great stand before God. The books were opened, another book, which is the book of life, and what? The dead were judged out of them according to what they have done. And the sea gave up her dead, and death and hell gave up their dead, and all were judged according to what they had done. And then he says, at the end of that text, those who were not found in the book of life were cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death. You know, that's when the rubber meets the road and the final analysis is had, and every wrong is made right, and every right has been honored. He says in verse 32, for the turning away of the simple shall slay them, and the prosperity of fools shall destroy them. You know, in Zechariah chapter 1 and verse 12, there were people that did not believe in the judgment of God. They had the idea that God was going to neither do good nor evil. And what a surprise laid in store when the judgment of God, just like the prophet said, came true. But you know what? There's also a trap in riches and wealth. The prosperity of fools will destroy them. It's a false security. And we alluded to that Sunday in Luke chapter 12. With that rich man whose soul was required of him that night, and he trusted in his riches. But whoso hearkeneth, verse 33, unto me shall dwell safely, and shall be quiet from fear of evil. You know where real security is found? It's found in wisdom. It's found in trusting God. Real security is found in Jesus Christ. Read John chapter 10. His sheep hear his voice, and he looks after them, and nobody can pluck them out of his hand. That's secure, my friends. That is safety. In Hebrews 13, verses 5 and 6, he says, be content with such things as you have. He said, I will never forsake you. I'll never fail you. You know, we can trust in a God that will not forsake us, that will not falter, that will not fail. And the beginning of all of the foundation of life, the way of wisdom, is fearing, that is respecting Him. Thank you so much. We'll get into chapter 2 next week.